Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. In this video I'm just going to give you a brief overview of the SnowPro Core Certification. I recently just did it again as my original one was coming up for 2 years. So as part of that I'm supposed to do the recertification exam itself. Now I was quite interested how the certification and the questions had developed over the course of those 2 years. I've got a Udemy course that helps people prepare for the SnowPro certification as part of 6 practice exams on there. And I'll put the link down in the description if you're interested, because nearly 2,500 people have subscribed and went through to that, which I'm really grateful for. But I was also mindful that it gets out of date quite quickly. And of course, from writing a book as well on Snowflake quite recently, Snowflake are releasing new features every single week, which makes writing a book or producing some content around it, it makes it very difficult to keep up to date. So you've got to keep on top of things. And so I decided to do the SnowPro Core Certification, the whole thing from scratch. I wanted to get a good overview of everything that had changed, and there's some surprises in there which I'll talk you through in this video. I've got 9 different sections and some notes in front of me just to give you some pointers, because again, a lot of people on LinkedIn reaching out to me asking for advice, tips, various different things around the SnowPro Core Certification. I'm currently writing a book on it, the second book that I'm going to write around Snowflake. That's going to be getting published around September this year, so look out for that if you're preparing to do your SnowPro Core Certification. Or if you're just interested in learning more about Snowflake, it'd be a great place to start. So 9 different sections. I'm going to go through each one and give you some pointers around what I think's changed and what I've added in as well to my practice tests recently after doing the certification. So let's start with the partner ecosystem. Originally, a couple of years ago when I did the certification, there wasn't as many partners involved with Snowflake as there is today. There's now a whole range and abundance of different partners that come under various different categories, such as data integration. You've got machine learning and data science as a category, you've got data governance as a category, and many more. So I actually got a couple of questions on this where in the certification it said, for this partner, what kind of category do they come under out of these 4 options? Now, if you're a beginner to Snowflake or working within the cloud environment, it might be quite hard and quite difficult for you to actually pinpoint and place where those vendors sit. And when I talk about these vendors, examples are Elation, Data Robot, Data IQ, Matillion, DBT. It's worthwhile kind of familiarizing yourself with the Snowflake documentation and just having a look through that. I would say probably the mainstream vendors, the ones that you may have heard about before, just getting an understanding at a high level what category they sit in, I think is important. And I've mentioned this before, it's not a prerequisite for the SnowPro Core Certification, but using the Partner Connect functionality within Snowflake is great. It takes you through to the vendor area within the Partner Connect portal, and quite often it's very easy to get started with a trial with any of those kind of partners. Literally by running through a wizard, it will set up everything that you need in Snowflake, as well as giving you like a quick start tutorial. And that's what I find really helpful if I need to get up to speed on a new piece of technology around that partner ecosystem of Snowflake. So that's number 1, partner ecosystem. Make sure you get a good handle on who does what, certainly the main vendors and what category they fit in. The next category is around Snowflake as an architecture and the overview at a high level. Make sure you check out the versions, right? So you've got standard, enterprise, business critical, and VPS. You will get some questions around what's the lowest version, for example, that supports row masking policies, or what's the lowest Snowflake version that supports AWS Private Link. So make sure that you get a good sense of, from a security perspective especially, what editions give you what, and what the lowest edition is, where that starts to get introduced as a feature. Definitely had a couple of questions around that. Data types. We'll come on to semi-structured data as a separate section of the 9, but Snowflake recently introduced a data type for geospatial data that's called geography data type. had a question come up around that. Still quite new. Nobody I know is using it at the moment, not my clients, but it's definitely getting more and more traction out there. And people do use it for telematics data for driving devices within cars, for example, as well as many other use cases. So make sure you're aware of that particular data type, plus all the other ones that have been there for a long time. The other thing I want to mention is around external functions. So external functions is calling a piece of code outside of Snowflake. It's a particular type of UDF. Some common use case that you see represented in documentation is around tokenization of credit card data, for example. So you get a credit card number coming into Snowflake. You're not necessarily going to store that and persist that. You'll put it through this UDF, which calls an external function. It'll switch that credit card number out for a token. You'll save that token and persist that in the database. If you ever need to retrieve it again, you can exchange the token and get the credit card number back for payment or what have you. So that's a common use case for external functions. It's a type UDF. It's executing code outside of Snowflake. Take a look at that. You'll get a couple of questions on that, no doubt. I definitely had at least 2 as part of the 100 questions on SnowPro Core Certification. There was a lot of questions around queuing queries. Make sure that you understand the difference between scaling up in Snowflake, which is going from a small, medium to large warehouse, etc. And the auto scale ability within Snowflake actually allows you to scale out. So adding additional clusters within the t-shirt size, the virtual warehouse size that you pick. So if you pick a small virtual warehouse size and you have a minimum number of clusters of 1, a maximum number of 10, you're allowing Snowflake to auto scale then to basically add additional clusters of a virtual warehouse size of small to cater for extra demand. So as demand increases on resources, Snowflake recognizes that, adds additional clusters to the thresholds or the guardrails that you've set up when you've configured the virtual warehouse. It can't at the moment go from a small to a medium automatically. That uses manual intervention, but there's something in private preview at the moment that will kind of emulate that auto scaling up. But at the moment, the exam will ask you specific questions around what do you do if you've got lots of queries queuing on a virtual warehouse? How would you do that? Make sure you know the difference between maximize mode as well. That's when you start your virtual warehouse with the same number of minimum and maximum number of clusters. That's for knowing predictable workloads that need high concurrency as well. So that will allow Snowflake to start up immediately with all the clusters available at the right time to cater for that particular workload. Obviously, it needs to be predictable to do that. Auto scaling is the other approach from maximized, where Snowflake will cycle up and down to cater for demand. The other questions I had in that category were around caching. Make sure you know the caveats around caching. So the cache stores any results. So like I'm talking about the result set cache now. There are different types of caching in Snowflake, which I would recommend in looking up as well. But my questions that I got in certification were around the result set cache. When you run a query in Snowflake and for the first time and it retrieves that result set and provides it to the user, it also pops it in the cache. The cache is not specific to a virtual warehouse. It's actually shared across all the virtual warehouses that are running at any one time. That result set will stay in the cache for up to 24 hours or until that cache gets full, and it'll start aging out the oldest queries. When you then run a query again, the query needs to be exactly the same as the previous query. The underlying data couldn't have changed either, or that will invalidate any result set in the cache. You also can't use any non-deterministic functions, stuff that can't be evaluated before execution time, like a equivalent of like a get date or current timestamp. I also got a couple of questions around parameters, max concurrency. So it was asking how do you change the settings for the number of concurrent queries that can run on the virtual warehouse at any one time. Give you a list of 4 different parameter choices you could pick. That was related to the maximum concurrency setting off the top of my head. And then there was another one around queuing as well. So this was around the query queuing in seconds, how long, if you want to override, how long Snowflake will allow queries to queue if they're waiting for resources to become available from a virtual warehouse before it actually kills them off. You can then change, I think it's query timeout in seconds, queuing query timeout in seconds. Just check it on the documentation. And because there's a couple of similar ones on there. Again, that's a question I've added into the Udemy practice exams. Streams and tasks. There was a lot more questions around this a couple of years ago when I first did the certification. Far less now for me in my experience. So understand the difference between streams and tasks. You will get questions on them. They're not as in-depth as I had before, but streams essentially are able to capture CDC, so inserts, updates, deletes within tables within Snowflake, and then you can then process those changes downstream to whatever effect that you need. Tasks then often used in conjunction with streams to orchestrate that data movement, but tasks allow you to execute a single SQL statement within a task, and you can chain multiples of those together, and they run in a DAG, so there's dependencies between each one as you set them. Understand the purpose of them. I don't think you need anything more. The Udemy practice exams have got go into a bit more detail around it, and I've left that in there because it is really important information just to get a good sense of the next level of detail beyond just the purpose of them. Moving on to data movement, loads of questions around SnowPipe specifically. So how long does SnowPipe keep load history? 14 days. Make sure that you get familiar with that, because on the copy into commands to load data into Snowflake, outside of SnowPipe, the metadata is stored for 64 days. And if you try to load any files again within that time frame, which have already been loaded, without explicitly overriding the default behavior, Snowflake will simply ignore those files based upon the checksum it generates at load time. SnowPipe also uses managed compute resources, as you can do with streams optionally, and there's a number of other services and capabilities within Snowflake that use managed compute. Make sure you understand what capabilities can use managed compute versus user-defined virtual warehouses, because I did get a question around that. Also, if you're needing to pick up data from an external stage, for example, and you need to load it into Snowflake, small files in the most efficient way, you might get a question around that. Again, that's a really good use case to use SnowPipe with the auto ingest feature, and that hooks up to a messaging queue depending on what cloud provider you're using for your external stage. SQS, for example, is one for the AWS, and I've got a video on that, and I've got a video on Google's equivalent as well. I'll pop a link to each at the top of the screen so you can check that out. Continuing on data movement, unloading data. So I had a couple of questions actually on how to unload data from a relational table in Snowflake. What data type can you unload it into? So JSON is one, Parquet is another. It will let you do that. If you wanted to force Snowflake to unload data into just one file, you need to have a copy option specified called single equal to true. I also had the inverse question, which said if you want Snowflake to unload data and it needed to be in multiple files, so it's single equal to false. The other one, or similar one to this, which is if you've got Snowflake running on Microsoft Azure, where can you load data from? And it gave me a couple of FSX on Lustre storage options, like Microsoft Cloud specific storage service options. But in there as well was Google Cloud Storage. And so it doesn't matter what cloud provider your Snowflake account is hosted on, you can still load data from either Microsoft, Google, Amazon, from an external stage perspective. So that's something that you just need to remember. Semi-structured data, so make sure that you know the data types. So variant, semi-structured data goes natively into a variant data column within Snowflake. 16 megabytes is your limit per record. You might get a question around certain parameters like strip outer array and what it does. Make sure you look that up. Strip outer array will get rid of that outer array piece and allow you to load that data into multiple rows. Okay, virtual warehouses then, so make sure you're familiar with the different sizes, the t-shirt sizes, and how they relate to vCPUs. So you might get a question that say, well, if you've got a small warehouse and it's got two vCPUs, how many does a medium one have or a large one have? It'll give you some options. It'll scale linearly, so if small is 2, medium is 4, large is 8, for example. Auto scale and scaling up, scaling out, maximize mode. Moving on to Snowflake, account security and sharing, you will get a lot of questions around the security aspects. What are the best roles out of the box to use to manage security? So security admin, user admin, that kind of things. An interesting one was what would happen if you had a cloned object in a primary Snowflake account and you replicate that. That was something I've never kind of even thought about recently. So basically, if you replicate a cloned object, it will replicate the data physically to a secondary account. Make sure you're aware of what you can and can't clone as well from an object perspective, and reader accounts as well. So make sure you understand the processes if you're sharing data and the person that you're sharing with, the data consumer, doesn't have a Snowflake environment, you can create a reader account. Make sure you understand what that reader account can and can't do. It's typically that reader account is just for selecting and working with data that you have provided to them and shared with them. And a couple of questions around row access policies as well. Question where if you give somebody ownership to a table which had a row access policy applied to it, and they wanted to see the masked data, would that role now be able to change the row access policy so they can see the unmasked data? So they need to have certain privileges to be able to do that. Giving them table ownership doesn't necessarily allow them to do that. And then finally, the last section is storage and protection. So make sure you understand what data you can replicate, how you replicate it, and also make sure that you understand the fail-safe retention periods and what objects they apply to and what they don't apply to, as well as the retention period for data, like for permanent, transient, temporary tables. Make sure you understand all of that. There was also questions around materialized views. So there's a lot of constraints around using materialized views. One of the kind of key limitations around materialized views is you can't join tables together in a materialized view. And so you might get a question specifically around that, asking you what is the, out of the following, what's a limitation for a materialized view. Stages, make sure you know how to reference internal stages. So with the ampersand and the percentage and the internal stage name, make sure you're aware of the difference between how you reference internal table stage and an external stage. Also understand the behavior if you were to drop an external stage and drop an internal stage and what happens and the variation between the two. If you drop an external stage, you're effectively just removing the pointer to the external cloud storage location. Files stay there exactly the same, but you've removed that external stage pointer now. And if you then drop an internal name stage, for example, that will disappear as well as all of the files and it won't be recoverable. So there you have it. Hope you found it useful. 100 questions, 120 minutes or something. But hopefully you found that useful. It gives you some tips. And like I say, there's a link to the Udemy practice exams below. Just refreshed it. So hopefully you'll find that useful and good luck in your certification. I also wanted to let you know about our Master in Snowflake program with myself that we run, and it's an exclusive signature program to help you master Snowflake and learn how to design, implement, and scale solutions in the cloud. And I've designed this program specifically for those people who have either scratched the surface using Snowflake or who are stuck working with legacy on-premise technologies and haven't been invested in by their companies and have fallen behind in their career. And what I've done is packaged up my knowledge and experience of working with Snowflake since 2017 and learning how to package up Snowflake's out-of-the-box capabilities. So this program isn't about theory. Of course, I need to introduce you to the concepts if you're new to Snowflake, and many of my members are, but it's really about introducing the theory and then in practice how you apply those in the real world. I've been through the pain of understanding what works and what doesn't.
Now I've got a formula or a set of recipes, if you like, that show you how to do that. So the Mastering Snowflake program includes in-depth, on-demand video course content that I've created. They all include practical hands-on demos. I provide access to all the code, templates, and files that I use as part of those demos, so you can download them and use them freely. You may want to use them in your day-to-day work. You may want to take them and customize them and use them as a starting point. All members on the program get exclusive access to a members-only group where everybody can help each other out and share their knowledge and best practice and get expert advice. Finally, I also carry out a group 60-minute coaching call with all the members where you can ask me anything about Snowflake, data analytics, data strategy, data architecture, you name it, interview advice, and I can help you and give my input and help and support and guidance around that. Finally, you'll get lifetime access to all feature updates. Snowflake's changing and evolving. There's new features and releases every week. At a high level, there's 10 modules. This is what we cover, everything ranging from the Snowflake architecture to getting data into Snowflake. And then once you've got data, how do you effectively use it, secure it, share it, and work with it to ensure that you get the maximum value from your Snowflake implementation. If this sounds like the thing that you're looking for, and if you're ready to take the ultimate step, I'd really encourage you to fill out the application form below.